Well, we're here at 32 after the hour, so why don't we kick things off? And we appreciate everybody joining this morning, this afternoon. And this is our second webinar in our series this year on advocacy trends that we're seeing both at the state and federal level. Today's webinar is going to focus really and hone in on things that we're seeing at the state level, the trends in state legislative and regulatory activities. So we'll dive in and talk about those in more detail here in just a bit. But we wanted to set the stage to kick the webinar off today and talk about a few of the things that we talked about in our last webinar. And Luke, if you could pop up our next slide for us. We have obviously here in the past couple days seen a lot of activity at the federal level. And we talked in our last webinar about a number of the issues that we're monitoring and we're preparing to gauge on. And as President Trump has taken the oath of office and has initiated his second term, we're seeing a flurry of activity. And some of it is expected, some of it's maybe a little bit unexpected, but really two big observations that we have this in the past couple of days is one, as we expected, the Trump administration is moving very quickly on people and policy. For those of you who remember the first term, the Trump administration, that term started very slowly when it came to people. And that is certainly not the case this time. And we'll talk a little bit about that in more detail. And then we also see that very much the president's in the driver's seat with policy. Congress is really deferring to the president's initiative, and they'll be really impactful as we go over the next couple days. I wanted to talk just really quickly about some things at the federal level that we're seeing that are important to our industry, and then we'll kick into the second phase of our webinar and focus in on the state issues. One, as I mentioned, we're moving very quickly with people. We're seeing the large majority of the nominees for cabinet positions either having already had their confirmation hearing or having them this week. We anticipate that a number of key cabinet officials will be in place in the very near future, thinking USDA secretary, EPA administrator, and some of those other key positions. But one of the things that's really been interesting to see this time too is those sub-cabinet nominees that have started to come into play. We've seen already at USDA almost all of the undersecretary nominees announced. We know many of these and good relationships with them. I was talking to one yesterday who's been nominated for an undersecretary role at USDA. I think the big question now is how quickly Congress or the Senate moves with approving those nominees. But we anticipate that they'll be in place much sooner than the previous Trump administration term and President Biden's term as well. I think another key piece on the people, there's been a lot of news this week about the federal workforce. The hiring freeze has gone into effect, and we're trying to see how that will impact some of our key areas of importance to the industry. I think one thing in particular that we'll be watching closely is how that impacts agencies like NRCS at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The NRCS has really staffed up in recent years and have hired a lot of staff who are in this probationary period. And there's some questions about how this hiring freeze will impact those in particular, which could have some really big impacts on our industry on the ag side. On policy, and we expected a lot of this, the president has moved very quickly with respect to immigration and border security, having signed a number of executive orders. We are in the process of we're monitoring those to see how those might impact our industry's workforce and some of the programs that we really depend on in the irrigation industry. We're also seeing we've seen 2 executive orders related to spending under the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law. Both of those pieces of legislation included some funding programs that are important to the irrigation industry. There's a lot of uncertainty right now about how those those spending payment freezes might impact. A lot of the money is already out the door, so it shouldn't impact too much, but there are probably some programs, some very specific projects that could be impacted. We would just ask if folks are starting to see those kinds of impacts, please let us know. The other thing that we're looking at is the president has announced or has signaled his intention to, in beginning of February, start imposing tariffs on key trading partners, Canada and Mexico kind of being top of the list. Really waiting to see how that is going to unfold. There had been some talk about those tariffs waiting and being used as Congress has gone through its reconciliation process. The thought being that these could be revenue raisers and that they could offset some spending for tax cuts and some of the other priorities of the administration. We're watching this very closely because this could have some pretty big impacts on the irrigation supply chain and the broader economy. So stay tuned for more on that. And then finally, another kind of key executive agency action the president has indicated he's taking is related to water. There's been a lot of coverage on water in California, and the president's signaled that he is directing agencies to reapportion water use in the San Joaquin Valley in California, taking it from the Endangered Species Act needs and requirements and reallocating it to the Central Valley in Southern California. Could be a real impactful decision for our industry, especially there in California. So we'll be watching that closely as well. One thing I have to share too, a number of folks on the call have been engaged in this, but EPA a couple weeks ago announced that they have paused their development of a water sense specification for spray sprinkler nozzles. The Irrigation Association has some pretty big concerns with the approach the EPA was taking. We recommended that they pause and allow industry and other stakeholders to develop a standard for that instead. EPA has agreed with us and announced that last or 2 weeks ago. So it was a big win for the industry. But today we're really here to focus on state legislative affairs. And this is something that we here at the Irrigation Association have put a real high priority on. We've added resources to our team. Luke here, we brought him into this role to help us focus in increasing ways on state legislative affairs. And we're adding some additional resources on to help us address regulatory issues as well at the state level. So some exciting things happening that we'll be able to engage in more detail and in a more robust way. But really going to kick things off over to Luke to take from here.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. And 2 things. You talked a ton about people there, but you forgot to introduce yourself, so I'm going to do it for you. Nathan Bowen is the Vice President of Industry Advancement and Policy for the Irrigation Association. And I'm Luke Reynolds. I'm the Associate Director of Government and Public Affairs for the association. So Nathan kind of queued up what we've been working on in terms of what's happening at the federal or the national level. 2 things that I just want to add to that list there that actually happened in the past couple of days from our perspective as the association. The Irrigation Association signed on to a letter supporting the Main Street Certainty, I believe it's the Main Street Certainty Tax Act, which would make permanent the 199A tax deduction, which is a 20% tax deduction for small and family-owned businesses. That letter actually is going to Congress today, so that's one of the actions that we've taken this week. Additionally, this week we signed on to a letter supporting a piece of legislation called the Repeal the Big Brother Overreach Act, which would repeal the Corporate Transparency Act, which requires small and medium-sized businesses to fill out beneficial ownership information report, and it's an onerous sort of bureaucratic process. So we signed on to a letter with several hundred other organizations to support the repeal of the Corporate Transparency Act. So two additional things sort of happening at the federal level there. But like Nathan said, we're really focused on trends at the state and local level. So we'll go ahead and kind of move on to that. And I wanted to start this conversation by framing the importance of being an irrigation champion in your community, because each locality and each state has its own regulations, it has their own policies, their own water challenges. It's absolutely essential that everyone in the industry becomes an irrigation champion. So as we're having these conversations, I think it's really important to think about who's the irrigation champion in your market, in your community. Is it you? Is it your boss? Is it your competitor? So just something to think about as we frame this conversation and have some discussions around some of the impacts of these regulations. So just to set the stage a little bit of what's happening at the state level. So as you can see from this map here, most of the state legislatures are in session. There's still a few states that are not quite in session. Where I'm sitting in Oklahoma, our state legislature has not gone into session yet. It's just a couple weeks away. First week of February, they're going to begin their next session. And just a couple fast facts about the breakdown of state legislatures across the United States. And Nathan made a really good point earlier when we were preparing for our webinar, just about how at the state level, things aren't quite as divided. So oftentimes we see things, and Nathan, I'd love for you to jump in if you wanted to kind of express what you said earlier, but things are moving faster at the state level because there isn't as much division. Do you have anything to add to that, Nathan? I didn't say it quite as eloquently as you.
Well, we have kind of a unique situation in the state legislatures, especially in that if you go to the next slide, all but two states have both legislative chambers controlled by the same party. Pennsylvania and Minnesota are kind of the two that have a split in the legislature. That means
I do want to point out just real quick, this is from 2024. So if the map looks a little bit off, don't send me an angry email. This is from 2024, so it might be a little bit off. But go ahead, Nathan. Sorry.
And so what we'll see because of that is if a bill passes one legislature or one chamber of the legislature will more the chances of passing both are increased. We do have a number of states where there's a divide between the governor and the legislature. And so vetoes are certainly a possibility in that scenario, though there are a few legislatures where there's a veto-proof majority. And so something that comes into play a lot more at the state level than the federal level at the moment is that split and how those legislatures are composed. And so as we engage on state issues, things can happen very quick and happen much quicker at the state level than they do at the federal level, which requires us to really be on top of it, but also to be prepared to engage on those issues as they do arise.
Yeah, and while we're sort of on the map here, I just want to point out one thing that we see, and really we're trying again to focus on trends. We see regulatory and legislative action, especially in things that affect the irrigation industry, often move from the West Coast to the East Coast. So as we're looking at the map again, I just want to point that out. It's really important to think that a lot of the issues that we might start working on in California or in the Western states, oftentimes we see those issues migrate to the East. So just another thing to point out there. And if anyone has a cat, I hope that they don't chase the laser pointer around the screen here, just a fair warning. So a question for those of you who are attending the webinar today, we would love to hear in the chat just about some policies or regulations or really challenges that are impacting your market. And I want to give everybody just a few minutes to kind of think about that and go ahead and answer in the chat. We'd love to hear about some of the things that are impacting you and your various places across the United States.
We've got a quiet crowd this morning.
I guess that's going to make our job easy this year, huh, Nathan?
Well, we know that there are a host of issues there that are impacting you, and we'll start talking about these in more detail. But we'd love to hear directly from folks about what are happening, and you're like, oh, great, we have some good examples. We're going to capture these at the. I've seen the plumber issue in Colorado. That's a big one that we've been watching, and so appreciate Mike you raising that. So hey, this is great feedback. So thanks for what you're seeing in your states.
And I also want to point out from Marin, I think maybe the city of Austin, we've been tracking their limits and regulations on single family residential, and we'll continue to do that and engage with the city of Austin as much as possible. Some non-functional turf, that's another one that we've been, we'll talk a little bit later on. This is great. Thank you for responding. Irrigation ordinance is not enforced. Enforcement, that is another big topic that, especially with some of these product regulations we discussed the past couple of years with the Colorado controller regulation. How is Colorado actually going to regulate the sale of those, I guess, not allowing the sale of those controllers, and then how are they going to do spot checks, that sort of thing. So that's great. So, yeah, go ahead, Nathan.
Let's move into talking through some of the issues that we're seeing, and I think you'll see a lot of the things in the chat on the list for us to kind of touch base on. Luke, why don't you start off on some of these key issues that we're seeing on the horizon?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Nathan. And again, it's great. Everybody just answered this. We're talking about it. So that's kind of a perfect segue. So, some concerns that we had last year was, the bill was in California to ban traditional overhead sprinklers. That bill died last year, but that was a concern. And I think it's important to address that and note that is something that we're watching for and want to be prepared for in the coming years, to see if that bill gets reintroduced. Indiana has introduced a bill in the current legislative session in 2025 that would require the use of water sense sprinkler spray bodies and irrigation controllers. So that is currently on the docket in Indiana. But really the trends that we're seeing, and Nathan, jump in here. Sorry, I don't mean to.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's the big trend that we're seeing at the state level. We have seen in the past decade, a number of states have adopted requirements for pressure regulating spray sprinkler bodies, and we have a list of the states that have done that. What we're seeing now, the trend now that really came to the fore last year, is that as states are passing legislation in that respect, not only are they including spray sprinkler bodies, but they're also including requirement for water sense labeled irrigation controllers. We saw 2 states in the last legislative session enact legislation, Nevada and Colorado. This legislation, the House Bill 1527 in Indiana, is a continuation of that theme, and we expect to see this year a number of other new efforts at the legislative level that include both the pressure regulated spray bodies, but also irrigation controllers. This particular bill in Indiana was introduced by a Democrat in a legislature that's controlled in both chambers by a Republican. So I'm not sure that this particular legislation has a lot of legs. It certainly could, but I don't anticipate that this is one that will be enacted, but we will more than likely see other states follow suit, and states where legislation could be introduced. And I might just say, Luke, one of the challenges that we're dealing with right now at the state level related to all of this is California is currently going through a regulatory process that would require smart irrigation controllers to be used in the state. There's some pretty challenging kind of implementation challenges around their current proposal. We've been engaging very heavily with the staff there at the CEC, and today we'll be sharing some comments to some of their proposals with them. But one of the things I do want to highlight that's new and different is currently the CEC is looking at using this process around landscape irrigation equipment and controllers, and including regulatory requirements that extend those regulations to agriculture controllers as well. That's a very big concern of the Irrigation Association and a number of others. We're pushing back very hard at a staff level with them right now, and are hopeful that they listen to us and that when they propose their regulation, which we expect to be in the spring of this year, that talk of including agriculture controllers will be able to put the kibosh on that. But that is something that's a big concern for us, and we've been engaging on in a really heavy way. And so we will continue that engagement with them to make sure that whatever final regulation we have is one that is workable for us in the irrigation industry.
Yeah, really well said. And I just want to go back to a point you made, Nathan, about the Indiana bill and it not being, I want to really emphasize that we're trying to highlight the trends. This is not comprehensive in terms of what we expect, both for pieces of legislation to be introduced and some that are probably already introduced. But again, what we're really seeing is this common trend of things happening on the West Coast and really moving eastward across the United States. So I think it's really important to just continue to emphasize that trend exists and will continue to exist as we move forward into the rest of the 2025.
We have a kind of wanted to pause for just a moment. There's a question in the chat about what about the current proposal is unworkable. Is that thanks, Ingy. There have been a few challenges that we've had with the requirements that as they've been developing them in California and sharing some of their thinking in regulatory text. One, the standard deviates pretty significantly from the WaterSense specification, which would require manufacturers and dealers and distributors to have a different set of products for California than they do with the rest of the market. There's challenges around, they're currently proposing that both the controller and the sensor that makes that controller a WaterSense labeled controller be packaged together. Currently, the WaterSense specification allows this to be packaged and sold separately. The concern is that could drive a lot of the manufacturers that don't manufacture both out of the California market. Could result in a lot of waste because consumers would have to buy products that maybe they don't necessarily need. And then three, there's some pretty big logistical challenges in the supply chain to doing that. On the ag side, this was a specification that was designed for landscape uses, and so has not had any input from agricultural stakeholders on the use cases, and so the presents really big challenges from a practical standpoint for agriculture as well.
Thanks for that question, Nathan. Thanks for taking that live. And I do want to be mindful we're kind of close on time. We're going to try to get this thing done in 30 minutes or so. So Nathan, just a heads up on that. So gonna move forward here to another issue that we've been watching from the state perspective and also from the federal perspective as well. But I really want to kind of dive into the state level bills that have been introduced regarding right to repair. And I want to pause before I even do that and just really highlight the fact that this is an issue that we have really strong advocates in the irrigation industry who are ensuring that the industry is represented to ensure that the industry itself can move forward without onerous right to repair bills, shall we say. That said, we've had 26 state level bills already introduced regarding right to repair. I want to be really clear here that not every one of these right to repair bills would affect irrigation or agriculture. Some of these are consumer electronics and of other natures. But again, what it demonstrates is a growing trend. So we're going to continue to see these state level right to repair issues continue to be introduced throughout the year. There are some right to repair bills at the state level that are concerning for the irrigation industry, and we are tracking those and we plan to engage on those to ensure that the industry is well represented. So I'm not going to go too deep into that, but I just want to reiterate the IA's position on right to repair, and that's to ensure the protection of intellectual property and the industry's interests in state and federal consideration of right to repair legislation. So again, This is an issue that we're actively engaged on, and we've got some really, really great industry partners that I thank you to you if you're on this call. And I would also say, if this is an issue that you're concerned about, please engage with us so that we can, we go a lot further as a team. So we want to really try to build our team out as best as possible to make sure that the industry is represented when it comes to right to repair. So I'm going to move on. Nathan, anything you want to add to that? Okay, I'm going to keep moving here so we have plenty of time for Q&A. Another obviously very impactful area for the irrigation industry is adjustments to the workforce. Obviously, retaining, recruiting talent is very challenging. We're already seeing several state level pieces of legislation being introduced around wages, around worker classifications, around overtime violations. All of these things are things that we're tracking as best we can. This is not by any means a comprehensive list of the pieces of legislation that we've seen introduced around this topic. These were just a few that popped up. This is another area where we would really love to hear from businesses within the irrigation industry about how these types of pieces of legislation really impact your business. So if you're from any of these states or any states that you're aware of updates to your wages or workforce, please engage with us and let us know how we can be engaged on these topics. Nathan, anything you want to add to that?
I think the only thing I would say is that this is an area that, particularly as we're entering at the federal level, there's not going to be a lot of federal regulatory activity in this space. And so what we will likely see in blue states is that attention focuses instead at the state level. And so we will be watching closely for impacts, particularly in on the coasts, for this kind of legislation.
All right, so I think that kind of brings us out of the highlights that we wanted to present for state legislative and regulatory affairs. Just a quick plug before we get into the QA. Again, I've been saying it, I've said it 15 times in this call. We really, really benefit when we all work together and take pride in the industry and advance the industry together. So there are always opportunities for individuals to get involved with the association. We have one coming up in March, our Advocacy Summit, which is kind of a new and improved version of our annual fly-in, where we bring everyone to the Hill and spend time engaging with stakeholders, both on Capitol Hill and at various agencies. Information in terms of registration, all that's going to be coming out in the next week or so. But definitely save the date if that's something you're interested in. And that is a capped event. So if you're really interested, definitely want to register early. And if you're always welcome to reach out to Nathan and I if you have any questions on that before we get registration up. Nathan, comments, additions?
No, but I've seen quite a few questions. We have questions in the chat. We've got some questions in the Q&A. I would we'll try to cover just a few of these here. So if you have a question that you'd like to pose, encourage you to put that in. One of the things that I've seen in several of the comments in the chat, a couple questions in the Q&A, is around the issue of turf and non-functional turf. That's an area that we have seen legislative activity on in a number of states last legislative session. We saw Colorado enact some legislation with respect to turf. We saw some legislation in California as well. That's certainly an issue that can have some pretty big impacts on our industry and the green industry more broadly. And I do anticipate that we'll see some additional legislative efforts this session on that topic. That's an area where when that legislation pops up, we collaborate and work closely with other organizations, associations across the green industry in those states in order to make sure that we all have a seat at the table. But I do anticipate that we'll be seeing some more of that here in the coming session this year.
Yeah, Nathan, I'll take a question. We received a question asking if the IA is working with growers or farmers who are concerned about irrigation legislation and regulation in their areas. And the answer is absolutely yes. We would love to engage with you. We would love to hear about the challenges that you're facing and see if there's alignment in terms of what we've been working on already and if there are adjustments that need to be made to ensure that you're able to continue your operation and producing the food, fuel, and fiber that we all rely on. So that's one question. Nathan, you want to take one? I've got another one I can take if you want.
Yeah, here's a question that kind of builds on the conversation we were having about the California irrigation controller. So Maggie asked if there was specific legislation that we could point to regarding the WaterSense bundling piece. So California, there has been legislation enacted that allows the California Energy Commission to propose regulations that would reduce energy use in the state through appliance standards. They have done that historically on a host of appliances, but have also put some regulations on the book with respect to pressure regulating spray sprinkler bodies. And they have now proposed a regulatory action on irrigation controllers. And in that proposal, the regulatory proposal, the text of the proposed regulation, as it was initially proposed, would require that those two components of a controller be packaged together and sold together. We're continuing to engage with the CEC on potential alternatives to that regulatory language that could kind of address that concern and that need or that concern. But we're continuing to work through that at the moment. We anticipate we're in this period of time right now where we're engaging with the CEC staff, providing them input. We anticipate that here in the next month, 6 weeks, maybe 2 months, this spring, the CEC will put forward a kind of an updated proposal for public comment. And that will be an opportunity for us, other stakeholders, to kind of see the latest and greatest, maybe not greatest, the latest thinking that they have on their regulations and be able to respond to that. So we anticipate that here in the next couple months.
Great. Okay, Nathan, we got a question from Matt here. Any idea if there will be changes to the Buy American Act and the Build America Buy America Act? You want to answer that one?
So I haven't seen anything yet this Congress on either of those, but this is a topic that I do anticipate that we could see some activity on. There is a lot of attention from the administration on Buy America provisions that can pose some challenges with our trading partners. Can lead to threats for retaliatory tariffs and other actions. So that's something that we have to be very mindful of. And we haven't seen anything. Not that I've seen yet, anyway. But something that we'll be keeping an eye on over the next Congress.
And you know, just a note on that as well, Nathan. I think one of the challenges that we're going to be seeing in the coming weeks around Inflation Reduction Act funding is at least some of that funding is going toward increasing American manufacturing capabilities. And it's going to be interesting to see if that funding is protected among sort of in alignment with the Trump platform, or if it's going to get pulled as well, just as a part of the broader IRA funding. So that's all tied in with one another.
There's a question about Colorado's requirements around irrigation controllers. So Colorado passed legislation in 2023 that would go into effect in 2026 that will require the irrigation controller sold in the state to meet the WaterSense specifications. We have not seen the implementing regulations on that yet from Colorado. Anticipate here in the next year that we'll be seeing that and we'll be engaging at that level. I think that's the real challenge with the state legislation around controllers. The WaterSense specification allows them to be sold separately. how that's actually implemented at a state level will be, I think, a real challenge, and one that we will have to be able to be at the table to provide input on as states continue to adopt that kind of requirement.
So a great question from Mike Mills. How does the updated immigration policy affect H-2A and H-2B? Nathan, I can't speak to precision in this, but I can speak to generally. We're expecting a lot of challenges around the H-2A and H-2B program. As far as I know, the last batch of H-2B visas were released 6 or 8 weeks ago, I think. So that's been the last action that I've heard on H-2B. I'm going to be on a call later this afternoon with a coalition regarding the H-2B. So Mike, we'll have some updates on that after we kind of collaborate with these other organizations. Nathan, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, we haven't seen anything specifically targeting either of those from an executive order standpoint. I think one of the challenges that we'll have with both of those programs here in the next, one of the challenges that we'll have is those programs as they exist now don't work very well. They're very cumbersome. It requires, we've had to have administrative actions by previous administrations to increase the number of visas and some other things of that nature. I think getting that kind of improvements to the programs administratively will be a little bit more challenging, but one that we'll have to be engaged on, and we are engaged on through coalition effort of other industries that rely on those guest worker programs. So more to come on that, but this first batch of actions from the president focused on some other areas that could still be impactful for us, but not necessarily on those two.
And one thing, Nathan, one thing that we actually discussed right before the call is one of the concerns that I have, and this is my personal, somewhat speculative concern, but one of the challenges with the H-2B program is going to be increased scrutiny. And so I have some concerns that the cost of that program for businesses that take advantage of it is going to significantly increase, because we're going to see on the flip side of that, the firms, the attorneys that they are engaging in order to take advantage of the H-2B program are going to have to bill more hours. And so I'm concerned that there's going to be a real increase in the cost of accessing that H-2B labor. I imagine it's relatively similar on the H-2A program, but from an H-2B perspective, it's especially concerning to me that we're going to see an increase in the cost of accessing that program with some of these changes to immigration and guest worker programs. Nathan, we could probably do one more question, but other than that, we're close to time here.
Yeah, I was just looking at, I'm seeing, we've been, as we've been standing up our state legislative capacity in a more robust way, we've been talking about what are the states that are problematic for us. And I think that the chat has been a real, has provided some illumination on that and really reinforced where we're seeing challenges. Of course, California is a challenge. Texas, we've had some challenging issues. There are some, we've identified Florida as well as an area. Colorado is another one. I'm seeing, I mean, we've had several folks here in the chat pop in about Colorado. As a Colorado native, I agree with that. And that's another area. We have a number of issues in Colorado that last year they did, there was a turf ban, non-functional turf, a legislation on non-functional turf. They really screwed up the backflow issue, and there's efforts underway. We've been in talks with trying to fix that issue, and then also the implementation of their the controller issue. So Colorado is another area that state will be spending quite a bit of time in. And for those of you on the webinar who live in Colorado, I would love to know that. We'd love to have you raise your hand so that we can get a sense of who's engaged in that state in particular, because having some folks on the ground there who want to be engaged and will be quite helpful to us in that respect. So Luke, why don't we wrap up here, and any closing comments that we have?
No, I think we pretty much covered covered what we did, and we're at time. So let's, like you said, let's call it. Well, I'll just say again, thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon and morning, depending on where you are. We're extremely appreciative of the opportunity to advocate on behalf of the irrigation industry. And Nathan, it's been a crazy week, but I'm excited about 2025. I think there's a lot of opportunity for the industry. I think there's a lot of opportunity to have a prosperous year. So I hope everyone else feels that way. And again, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, everybody, and be looking for information on our next webinar. We're kind of tentatively looking at having our next one coincide with the end of the first 100 days of the Trump administration to kind of give a recap of what's happened to date and what we'll be anticipating moving forward. So thank you all for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you all.